Finance is one of the most forgotten about tools that we really need to solve for, I believe, with CDR if we're going to get to real scale. And this deal is the forerunner to much more scalable and larger scale solutions that hopefully we'll be bringing online before the end of this year.
Carbonsations, today's carbon industry leaders.
Welcome to the Carbonsations podcast, where we speak to some of the leading figures in the emerging carbon industry. Our guest today is Jim Mann, founder and CEO of carbon removal company Undo, which specializes in enhanced rock weathering. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. If you're familiar with the format, you'll know that we traditionally like to know our guest background before getting into the business side of things, especially given that climate tech and specifically carbon removal are such new spaces. So it's always interesting for us to learn what folks used to do before getting into this line of work. And I'd love it if you could share with us a little bit of what that was for you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally an ecologist. So I trained as an ecologist, but drifted off onto an entrepreneurial track. But I guess that meant I knew about climate relatively early on and figured it was a government problem to be fixed. So I went and spent some time building small businesses and kept a climate thread. So I'm on my third retrofit of a house at the moment. Nearly there, nearly got all my solar and solar hot water and things in now. Then spent several years in business before becoming increasingly concerned about climate. And about 6 years ago, I started working on nature-based solutions in Scotland, so tree planting, and that led on to peatland restoration. And as I became more concerned about the risk to nature-based solutions as we hit or get close to 2 degrees or perhaps even warmer, which is looking like the most likely scenario at the moment, I started going back to the books, reading lots of papers on different potential pathways, and became somewhat obsessed with enhanced rock weathering. I love the fact that it has benefits across the supply chain, doesn't need new infrastructure, so can scale rapidly, or theoretically can scale rapidly, and potentially remove a lot of carbon.
Excellent. Now, moving on to Undo, what inspired you to found the company as opposed to joining somebody else? And what made enhanced rock weathering your CDR method of choice?
Sure. So why I found something? Well, at the time, enhanced rock weathering was just in the lab. I think the largest trial that had been done when we started was less than an acre. So this is, really laboratory scale experiments, and there wasn't any reason why it shouldn't be done at larger scale so we could learn faster. So it was really a case of somebody needed to just get on and do it. There wasn't an ERW company to join. It was a case of, if we're going to do this, we've just got to get on and do this. And so start an organization to do that. Enhanced rock weathering particularly I find interesting because it's just tying in with the existing extraction sector. So you've got mines and quarries already extracting material and creating byproduct that can be used for enhanced rock weathering. You've got existing haulage infrastructure that's moving minerals about anyway around the world. We move a lot of minerals around the world. And same with farms, they already exist. Same with tractors and spreaders. So it's really a case of connecting up the supply chain. In practice, it's a lot more complicated. Being able to measure this accurately, being able to capture all of the supply chain data that you need to make a credible claim is complex. So we've ended up doing a lot of science and technology build, but I still very much believe that as we start solving more and more of those problems, the potential for ELW to grow very rapidly and therefore have a very big impact on climate is the main thing. And that's what drives me.
Okay, thank you. And so with that in mind, what actually sets Undo apart from other ERW project developers? Because there's more of those now and more and more are popping up.
Yeah, and that's great. And the more the better, because all of that moves the field forward. I think there's a number of things that Undo is different. We have some patents on measuring techniques that we developed. They enable us to accurately measure the amount of not only rock that's disappeared, because that's just one factor, but demonstrate that that's carbonic acid weathering, and it's not always the same thing. you can have strong acid weathering and problems like that you need to be accounting for. So those measuring techniques are critical. I think the way we think about scale is important as well. And we're probably not unique here, but we're unusual. We think a lot about what is the toolkit that enables a project developer to rapidly grow their own business. How do we provide them with that tooling so that we can get more people doing this? So we want to see more and more developers of EOW, and we want to make it easier and easier for them. And that's really our focus as an organization.
Excellent. And now, speaking of Undo's technology, what would you say the coolest pieces are, and what do they enable?
So there's a couple of things. I think our software stack is really very, very exciting. So we enable you to capture millions of data points which go alongside your claims. You need a pretty sophisticated set of software solutions. And these are everything from collecting the data at the quarry site, so the mineralogical data, through to tracing it, so taking GPS data off trucks, GPS data off tractors. Where we don't have that, we have our own hardware that can go on a tractor to make sure we're getting those spreading records really accurate. We have mobile phone apps for different people in that supply chain to be able to do this, to capture the appropriate data in a really easy, efficient way. And then the science is the other point, and the way that we capture data in the field now and the granularity of that data is unique. It's an empirical measurement of not only the amount of rock that's disappearing, but we get the soil pore water. We can prove from that this is carbonic acid weathering and that we've got carbon dioxide being captured.
Okay, and since you guys work with farmers, how do things look up from their perspective? What are they saying about their work with you?
So farmers are great. We find that farmers bring other farmers into the process. They understand their soils deeply.
How so? How do farmers bring other farmers into the process?
Wow, I wish we fully understood. So when we start spreading in a new area, we typically will find a number of farmers who want to work with us. They often are a little bit cautious. Their soil is their number one asset. So they're always a little bit cautious about doing something new and different. But typically they'll spread maybe one field, come back to us after a few months, and then ask us to spread the rest of the farm once they've seen benefits to their soil and their soil health. And then we find that their neighbours start popping up. And we don't always know how these conversations have happened, but we find these little hubs of farmers around the first early adopters. And eventually over time, you can imagine these sort of hotspots start closing up, and you've got a large area of farmers who are real advocates for what we're doing. So yeah, there's some kind of real world viral loop there.
All right. And do you have any details, like as far as crop yield increases or anything like that?
Yeah, so we published a paper with Newcastle University last year where we were working on university soils. So this is a university farm in the northeast of England. And we saw a 10% increase in yield. We have other agronomic experiments. We're not always seeing that level of yield increase, but we are getting some really consistent trends now where with the spreading density we use in the field, we're seeing increases in yield, particularly on grassland, and grasslands where not only is the more grass being produced each year, but it's of a higher quality, which is great news for farmers.
Absolutely. That is excellent news. Now, another question I have for you is regarding Undo's ambition to become the first company to remove 1 billion tons of CO2. How exactly do you plan on achieving that type of scale?
So that comes back to being able to work with the appropriate people in the supply chain, being able to access the right minerals, the right partners, and enough agricultural landing. We believe in building out a system that incentivizes all of those players. So everybody in the stack, if you like, has to have the right incentive. And that's how we've tried to structure our business model so that this is genuinely a win for everybody involved, and that farmers are getting benefit, as are the mineral owners, as are the project developers who are helping to connect the two.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to ask is kind of the really major question. I know that you've partnered up recently with Curate, British Airways, and Standard Chartered. And I was wondering what you could tell us about this formation, how it came about and who does what in it.
Sure. So British Airways are the off-taker. So British Airways looking for innovative ways of helping reduce their carbon footprint. Curate, an organization that build portfolios of credits, but also look to help people understand their footprint, to help them put together a robust portfolio. Standard Chartered, a banking partner, so they're the financier behind this. So in this case, they are providing an innovative finance solution, which means that British Airways don't have to pay upfront for their credits. And between Curate, who are science-based and checking the quality of our work, and ourselves, then we are then funded to move things forward quickly. And it's a forerunner to what hopefully will become much more scalable financial solutions for the industry, because particularly with enhanced rock weathering, you've got a cash flow problem. In most CDR companies, there's either a cash flow problem because your credits aren't delivered immediately when you do the work, or there is a CapEx problem. So the capital expenditure you're making at the start of a project will take many years to return. And so finance is one of the most forgotten about tools that we really need to solve for, I believe, with CDR if we're going to get to real scale. And this deal is the forerunner to much more scalable and larger scale solutions that hopefully we'll be bringing online before the end of this year, if all goes well.
Since you mentioned credit deliverability, how quickly are credits actually delivered in this space, particularly with the enhanced rock weathering?
So there's been no verified credits delivered yet for enhanced rock weathering. Us and other companies have delivered credits to companies which have their own science teams that are happy to self-certify those. But verified credits haven't yet been delivered. I think we're probably still a few months away from that. And it will eventually be sort of 14 months, I think, probably from when you first start a project or a new deployment before you'll deliver credits against it. But then it could be multiple years, depending on the particle size that you're using or the grain size of the material you're spreading. It could be several years before you get the balance of the value returned against those credits. And so you're trying to fund a gap of 14 months up to maybe 5 or 6 years of cash flow, which is not the easiest to do. It's also not the hardest. But with a new technology, nascent technology, it's certainly a challenge.
And can you walk us through the verification process, or at least maybe give us a sneak peek as to what that looks like?
So you've got a number of elements with your verification process. So you're going to need to have the scientific data that demonstrates that the weathering has happened and at the right resolution to cover your project area. You're also going to need to have all of the proof of work, so demonstrating that the minerals are of a consistent quality, of the quality that you say they are, that they have been transported and used, as you say, they have, and that you will then have to do all of your life cycle analysis just to give you a net CDR figure. And that's a lot of the heavy lifting that our software solution does, is take a lot of that out of the process. So it's done in an automated and efficient manner. Once you've got all of that, then you're in a position to make a claim against your carbon credits with one of the registries.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. Now, but while we're still on the subject of partnerships, I also know you recently struck a new follow-on deal with Microsoft, who to date is the largest buyer of carbon removals. So could you share some details about this deal as well? Yeah,
sure. So it's second deal we've done with Microsoft. They buying, I think it's 15,000 tons of carbon removal as part of this deal. They have also put a significant investment into some of the scientific areas that still need further development, and for which, of course, we're extremely grateful. They have been a wonderful partner to work with, and some of the science that will come out of this will be really important for the field. So we have a project in the UK where we actually have a field with a membrane underneath it, so we can capture all of the pore water as it leaves the field. We're putting gas domes on there, so we're controlling for any gas flux, and we're doing all of the normal sampling you do with an ELW project at a very high resolution. the data from this project will be made available. So it'll be available for the academic community to study, and is intended to move the field forward. So Microsoft, as you say, they're the biggest buyer of the CDR. They're about 75% of the entire market today. Having them collaborate around enhanced rock weathering and really proving out some of the most important things that we need to understand as a field is really beneficial.
Can you share anything about like as far as amount and duration of the contract?
It's a 1-year deal at this stage. So really developing these scientific pieces and an immediate delivery of credits. Microsoft don't share the amounts, the actual value of contracts that they sign.
Okay. All right. So another question I have for you is that, given your involvement in the space and better view of the supply and demand situation of the carbon removal market at large, I was wondering whether you could kind of give us a feel of where the market is right now and perhaps what are some of its main challenges at the moment?
I think that we're speaking just a few days after the US elections. So I think one of the big challenges has to be the change in leadership in the US. It leaves quite a bit of uncertainty, and that makes buyers probably more nervous. It certainly makes investors more nervous, and generally sort of leaves this uncertainty across the industry. I think the medium-term trends are extremely good. I feel very bullish about carbon markets. I hope it's good because we really need to be solving as quick as we can for getting CO2 back out of the atmosphere. We're seeing an constant increase in these extreme weather events, which are directly linked to climate change. And that's as a result of too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and we need to be on top of that. The regulation we're seeing move through the European Parliament is extremely promising. The cross-border adjustment mechanism that the EU put in last year, and their consultations around CRCF, which is their integration of carbon removal into the EU ETS, so emissions trading scheme, is extremely positive and gives us a good idea of when these markets should start to mature, assuming that we can provide the supply to them in time, which is our job. So I think towards the end of this decade will be a very important point in time where the markets will be maturing and starting to merge into the established emissions tax schemes that already exist. That's true in Europe, UK, probably Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and maybe more that I'm not aware of. But certainly those markets are all tracking nicely.
And speaking of political factors, COP29 is just around the corner and will already have started by the time this episode airs. But I'm curious as to your opinion of whether an Article 6 agreement will impact the CDR market, how you see that impacting it, if at all, and also in the event that there's no agreement on Article 6.
So I think Article 6 is one of these things that's been kicking around for some time. It should clear the way and create some clarity around international trading of carbon credits if they can get to an agreement. It would be really helpful for it to be there, but we've come a long way without it being there. So I see it as if we get it, great. It's another piece ticked off, another piece resolved, and another piece where we've got some stability. And we're going to need to keep making these incremental gains. I'm not sure it's going to happen this time. I think it's more likely to happen next year, but let's see, fingers crossed. And again, we've just got to keep plugging away. It won't be the end of the world if it doesn't happen, but it would be a nice boost if it does.
Since you mentioned kind of the end of this decade, like kind of the years leading up to 2030 will be crucial in terms of like merging of compliance and voluntary markets, how do you see the space developing further, like beyond 2030?
So assuming we start to get things lined up nicely by 2030, I think we'll start to see exponential growth beyond that. We know beyond any question that we need a very, very large volume of carbon removal, somewhere in the region of, depending on who you speak to, 10 billion tons by middle of the century. But that's just a huge, huge amount. And to have any hope of doing that, we need to be into exponential growth. And for the exponential growth to happen, we need exponential demand, which is only going to be driven, I believe, by regulation. So we need to get that integration between the voluntary and the compliance markets to drive that demand. And then we're going to have still a hell of a job on the supply side to keep up with that. But hopefully with that demand pull, it will increase the investment into the supply side.
Hopefully. Jim, for my final question before we wrap up this episode, I'd love it if you could please share with us what Undo has lined up for the future. What announcements and upcoming developments can we look forward to?
So hopefully more of the same. We're working on some pretty interesting stuff on the science front. So we are doing final bits of work on some of our techniques that we'll be starting to publish around shortly, which are really valuable for the field in terms of what can be measured and the accuracy that you can get in that measurement. And also in the finance space, we've spent 18 months working with a major bank, building out some really innovative finance products. And hopefully we'll have an announcement early next year on those. But again, having really scalable finance is going to be critical to the growth of this space. So hopefully we'll have an announcement there as well soon. We're getting extremely close to an agreement in that space.
Definitely looking forward to that. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast. It was a real pleasure to speak to you and learn about all the important
Thank you very much for having me.
and exciting work that you guys are doing. It's really much appreciated. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode of the Carbonsations podcast and would like to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe. We really appreciate the support.